Professor Jehoash Hirshberg, thank you for joining us today.
I'm happy to meet you.
We're about to listen to pieces by three composers who were born in Germany around the beginning of the 20th century and immigrated to Palestine after the Nazis took power in 1933. What was expecting a young European composer in the land of Israel in those times, musically speaking?
I may say that nothing was expected. This was an example of refugee composers who came to a country which has no receiving society at all. There was barely any musical life at all in Palestine at that point. The Jewish population was very small, about 600,000 right when the war started, that's all. When they immigrated, it was much, much smaller. The number of musicians was extremely small. There were no active composers, and they were an example of immigrants who create the musical culture.
They also went individually, right? It's not that they were organized and say, we composers go, but they were individual, each one with his story.
This was an example of what is technically called refugees, not immigrants.
Right.
They immigrated at a relatively early period. Ben-Haim in 1933, soon after the takeover by Hitler, and Tal in 1934.
Yeah.
They understood the situation was deteriorating, no chance for a better chance. And Ben-Haim wrote in his letters, which I quote in my book, he said, I came as an unknown, 36 years old, known to anyone, and no one could do anything.
Yeah.
He started with nothing.
Although he was an established composer already and even conductor.
In Munich, München, and in Augsburg, he was a very successful opera conductor.
Yeah.
But he lost everything when he immigrated to small Tel Aviv, which was a tiny Mediterranean town. He met few musicians who were already active in Tel Aviv. And he was very happy to find out that everyone spoke German in Tel Aviv. The musicians were almost all of them from Germany. Even those who came from Russia spoke German. Germany was not only the language of the Germans in Germany, but of an enormous part of Europe, all the neighboring countries. And was also a great cultural language. The Russians and almost anyone spoke German. And this was just spoken German on the streets.
Right.
So in this sense, it was quite easy.
Yes. And how did such an incredible move for a composer who is already 34 or more, 36, with established musical language, how did that affect his musical style?
Well, that's an excellent question, the one which I asked him several times. Ben-Haim didn't tend to speak about his music. He said that he spoke through his music, but he never gave me a clear answer. The answer was, well, I try to put more light in the music, if you can understand what it means. In fact, his music went in two conflicting directions. One was to keep the European romantic language, romantic music, and he was not a revolutionary. He wrote tonal music, and then he tried to start something new. Like he was the founder of the Hebrew Lied, writing songs, which beforehand he did only in German. He started to do it in Hebrew, and actually studied Hebrew rather quickly with daily private lessons. He needed it in order to be able to teach young children. This was the only way to barely make my living.
And wasn't there also emerging a new Israeli style of composing, which is called Mediterranean style, or?
Well, that I don't accept this definition.
Okay.
The Mediterranean style was a name created by another composer, Mark Lavry. By the way, also he was born in Riga, but he developed all his career in Berlin.
Yeah.
And was, of course, fluent in German. Yeah. But he tended to create a totally new style, which he called Mediterranean, was very folkish. Yeah. But Ben-Haim did not accept this style at all. I must emphasize there was no Israeli, well, of course not Israeli, Israel didn't exist yet, but there was no local school. There were none of them knew, and they did not know one another before the immigration. There was no school, no leader or director, nothing like Bartok in Hungary, and they did not affect one another. So I don't think there was no Mediterranean school. Okay. Lavry created this term because he was the most practical of all. I see. And the most commercial.
He wanted to put it in a box.
Yes, but there was no Mediterranean school at all. And Ben-Haim did not write in Lavry style at all. Yeah. Each of them had his own way.
Okay. Okay. But they did meet with the folk music of Israel. I know that Brachat Safira sang to them her melodies, and they arranged it or integrated there in their music. No,
not all of them. Ben-Haim was the one who really worked with Brachat Safira. When she divorced her husband and had no accompanist on Ben-Haim became her accompanist, and she also asked him to make arrangements for her songs, and he made 35 arrangements, more than any other composer. Not all of them worked. For example, she did not work with Tal at all.
Yes.
With other composers, more or less, yes, but mostly with Ben-Haim. Okay. But this was only one part, one section of his writing, and didn't affect the orchestral music or the large scale. Yes. Ben-Haim wrote in all genres except for operas. Okay. Although he was a great opera conductor, he did not write operas at all. He was a very prolific composer. Yes. As anyone who looks at a list of compositions in my book, there are several hundred compositions.
Yeah. Professor Hirshberg, thank you very much. We will listen now to Paul Ben-Haim's 3 songs without words in the arrangement for viola and piano. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Professor Hirshberg, Josef Tal is already a bit more modern in his musical upbringing. Can you tell us who were his teachers and composers who influenced his musical development?
Oh yes, Tal was Grüntal originally. Was much younger than Ben-Haim. When he was born in 1910, Ben-Haim in 1897. It's 13 years difference. And he lived in Berlin and studied in Berlin. Actually, he was born in Poznan in Poland, but his family came to Berlin when he was still a child, and he got all his education in Berlin. And Berlin, of course, was much more advanced, the center of avant-garde, unlike München, who tended to be more conservative. The greatest composer in München was, of course, Richard Strauss. Was a giant, real giant, very powerful. His influence, whereas Berlin was the center of Hindemith and Schoenberg. And his immigration was very difficult. Economically, it was very difficult. He got a certificate of entry from the British administration as a photographer. He could not get it as a musician.
And so he studied photography only in order to get the certificate, right?
Yeah, oh yes.
Yes.
When he decided to immigrate, it took several months. When he studied photography, which he also liked a lot.
Yeah.
He liked to be a photographer.
I think I read it was 1.5 years of studying, actually. It was a long period of thought and
photography was a new art, was new technology, and very, very difficult. It's not like now that you have these telephones with which you take photographs. Then it was a very complicated machine. And he had very hard life at the beginning. Even his wife had to leave Palestine and return to Germany for a while to live with friends because he could not keep both of them. It was only 3 years later that he finally settled in Jerusalem and found his way. At first, he wanted to work in agriculture in the kibbutz, but it was not for him. He could not stand the heat of Israel. He fainted in the field. 1936 was a very important year. First of all, what became the Israel Philharmonic, the Symphony Orchestra of Palestine, was founded in 1936. And Tal also studied at the great music school of Berlin. He had to study a second instrument. He was a virtuoso pianist, a really great pianist. He was the first one who performed Brahms' first piano concerto in Palestine. He also studied harp.
Yes.
So he became the harpist of the Palestine Orchestra. And then when Clarice Sarvash arrived as the professional harpist, it was for him, he was the substitute. Then they founded the Academy of Music, where he became immediately a leading theory and composition teacher. And he started to make sort of very modest living as teacher. And stayed in Jerusalem from then on all his life. And he was the leading avant-gardist from the first minute he came. In the music school in Berlin, the leading teacher was Hindemith. He studied with Hindemith, who was a great avant-gardist, and some other great teachers. He got an excellent education.
But I think that he he took courses with Hindemith, but I think spiritually or by his inclination, he was much more into the real avant-garde of the new language of Schoenberg. That was his and electronic music.
Yeah, this was another thing. First of all, I may say that my great book on Tal is just now at the printers.
Oh, wonderful news.
Yes, and will be published at first, at least in Hebrew, with several other colleagues. It's going to be a big book of about 500 pages because it was extremely prolific.
Yes.
Now, Tal was different from Ben-Haim in that his main field was opera and stage music. He had 11 operas and stage works. And 8 of the operas are full-length operas, very elaborate and very avant-garde.
Yes.
Also on the stage, it's what is called Lyre educational operas. And unfortunately, they are so complicated that they are performed, most of them only once or twice. Ashmedai was performed in Germany, in Hamburg, and in New York. The other operas were performed, most of them only in Germany. 2 of them
in German. Are they in German?
They are German operas. When I wrote my chapter, I worked only in German all the time, and not very easy to German. There are only 2 Hebrew operas, Metzodah and Yosef, which are Hebrew, but their style is totally German. In fact, Tal, although he was a leading Israeli composer, his language was very German. I knew Tal very well because he was my colleague at the Hebrew University, at the musicology department. But he felt much better in German. I may say that Tal retained his German culture all his life. I can say even more than Ben-Haim. And that's another thing I found out about this composer. German culture is so powerful that they did not go away from it. They did not want to leave it. And as I say, most of his operas were German. So that's the way we should understand him.
Professor Hirshberg, thank you so much for this interview. It's wonderful to document these ideas and thoughts.
All the best in your concert.
Thank you. We will listen now to the Lament by Josef Tal, originally for cello and harp, and now for viola and harp. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Youngerman. Thank you so much for joining us for this project.
I'm very glad to join.
Great honor.
Talk of Jacoby.
Yes.
And not very well known, but
yeah,
he probably deserves to be much better known composer.
I think so too. He was born as Heinrich Jacoby in Königsberg. Where did he study? What were his musical influences in Germany?
Well, his major influence, and that was throughout his life, was Paul Ben-Haim, with whom he maintained contact over many years. He was, according to Jacoby, was his first student. They actually started at the Berlin Hochschule at the same time in 1927. So Hindemith was a new faculty member, and Jacoby just entered as a student. Yeah. And so the way he described it, Hindemith kind of experimented on him with his pedagogical methods.
Yeah.
And among other things, he also convinced him to switch from violin to viola. That was also through Hindemith's advice.
Yes.
And so this was a very, very important influence. Sometimes it was perhaps too big a shadow for Jacoby.
Yeah.
But in general, it was really his music is very influenced. It's very obvious. Perhaps not as much in this piece that you're playing.
Yeah.
Which is of a certain with Jacoby. It's very obvious that he had two styles. Okay. He had like a more popular style, and then his more serious Hindemith influenced style.
In your eye-opening article, a melody that doesn't exist anymore in the Music Quarterly, you suggest that more than of their own free choices, it was expected, almost demanded, that the European composers forget, so to say, where they come from, discard those influences and heritage, and write in a way which will represent a new form society fitting to the Zionist project?
Well, I think that was perhaps something that any immigrant has to adjust to a new environment and new expectations. And for some people, it was harder. And Jacoby was certainly one of the people who were more conservative.
Yeah.
And it was harder for them to adjust. And my theory was that this is why he kind of split himself into the two so different styles.
Yeah.
But it's well understood that he wanted to be popular and accepted. And with this specific piece, I think it went way beyond what he had expected, because it became so popular. It has an interesting history. Maybe I can talk a little bit about that.
Yes.
He told about the composition of this piece. The idea, it has a program, which is kind of attractive, following the history of the Jewish people through the form of variations.
Yeah.
And the idea was suggested to him by someone else, and then he composed it. That's the story. When he was waiting in line like for, I don't know how many hours for the ration of oil.
Okay.
Heating.
Yeah.
So he did that, but the purpose of the piece was to be performed on the radio on the children's hour, the youth hour.
Okay.
It was supposed to be really for children.
Yeah.
But somehow this piece that he composed very casually became a great hit.
Yes.
It was played over and over through the war years.
Yes.
Like, 48, 49, it was played over and over again. He arranged it for orchestra. Initially, it was for piano and viola. Maybe that's how you perform it.
Yes.
And so it became identified with him more than any other work, which in the end even disturbed him a bit, because he had all these other
inspirations,
works that are less known. Yes.
It is actually a very it's a very Hindemith-like story that he composed it while waiting for something in a line. And Hindemith would write pieces in 2 hours train trip, fantastic pieces like his solo viola sonata. So that's
so maybe
could be an inspiration in that sense as well.
Yes.
So yes, I understand, because this piece is a really, one feel there is a national pride in this piece, and it is his most well-known piece, I think, at the moment.
Yes, it is definitely.
So maybe he lost a little I mean, he wanted to write more in the modern style, and
yes, even at the same time when he was composing this, he was composing in a very different style. His most important works are probably the 3 symphonies, which are not very well known, but they were recorded.
Yeah.
So they were performed.
Yeah.
And they are very Hindemithian as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank
Youngerman.
you.
We will listen now to David King's Lyre by Hanoch Jacoby. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
כינור היה לדוד, והיה הכינור תלוי למעלה ממיטתו של דוד, כנגד החלון הפתוח. בחצות ליל באה רוח צפונית ומנשבת בו, והמיתרים משמיעים קול נגינה חרישית. לקול הנגינה נאור דוד וקם, והלחין תהילים ללחנים בהשראת הכינור שלו. והמנגינות שעלו מהכלי המופלא שלו לעולם לא יישכחו שוב, לובשות ופשטות צורה. בראשונה הרי הוא ניגון רועים, אשר שמעו אותו מפי דוד. לאחר מכן הופך הניגון לזמר מלחמה. אחרי כן הוא גולה עם הגולים ובוכה עם הבוכים על נהרות בבל. בגולה הוא מופיע כשיר ערש של אם עברייה המצפה לימות המשיח. כשיר חסידי וריקודי הוא מעורר את העם לאקסטזה והודיה לבורא עולם. עם חזרתם לציון של המתיישבים הראשונים, הבילויים, הופך הניגון לקריאה נלהבת. אז מהדהד בשירת העמל והבנייה מחדש בריקוד הורה. לבסוף, עם הכרזת המדינה העברית, חוזר הניגון לעיר דוד כהמנון מנצח.